Nick Falk is Executive Director of the URBED Trust and founder of URBED, which is made up of the elision of urban and economic development. And a few years ago, he carried out research for the GLA into the state of London's towns. So I'm interested to ask him what he thinks the impact of COVID-19 will be on outer London. So Nick, do you see similarities between today's crisis and the response to the 19th century city and its unhealthy environment by people like
Yes.
Howard and the TCPA?
Well, I think it's interesting to reflect on what Howard was really saying, because I think what he was arguing is as relevant today as it was 120 years ago. He was concerned, if you recall, about the horrors of both the city, but also the boredom of the country. And he thought you could create a good compromise by promoting garden cities, a name he got from his time in Chicago. And if you go to Shanghai, you will see in the planning exhibition there, really great exhibition, that Howard is treated rather like Jesus Christ. I mean, there's a man who really said it all. So he's one of a few great experts that's exported well. And Howard wasn't having to deal with the challenge of such an interconnected world. He lived at a time when there was still a British Empire and people had respect for Britain, and within Britain there was respect for government. There was a belief that government could achieve things, but he saw that you could only really achieve things by taking your own initiative. So that's extremely relevant. And above all, he came up with the idea that you could fund the crucial infrastructure to capturing or sharing in the uplift in land values. And that it's that which was the central idea. The design side, he left to other architects, and Welwyn Garden City is very different from Letchworth and so on. And today, I think if we were repeating his principles, we will be building at much higher densities, say 50 to the hectare. But I think the idea of a green and blue web to connect the town or settlements with the country is as relevant today as it was then, and which touches on the issue of the green belt, because I don't think Howard would ever have conceived a green belt of the kind we've inherited. He just saw it as important for people to have some contact with the country. We've taken the idea further as really the only break on sprawl. Unfortunately, it's caused people to jump over the green belt. So the sprawl is happening all over the place. And most of the new development, you probably know, is taking place in areas which are totally disconnected from public transport. Howard would have expected people to walk and cycle, and it seemed to me that people would have expected deliveries, so that's similar. I mean, it would be the coalman, no doubt, coming, the milkman with his horse and so on. So in that way, the world is the same. I think that he would have assumed local authorities to have greater power because he would have the experience of Birmingham and Manchester in tackling the inequities and the appalling quality of the air and so on. And I think that that's one thing that's really changed. We've lost the capacity or the belief in the capacity of local authorities. But this in turn leads to the idea of development corporations. And of course, the post-war development corporations did really apply Garden City principles to a very considerable extent. And with a degree of success, people like living in Milton Keynes today. Though Harlow isn't everyone's dream, it undoubtedly helped Londoners to get better housing, better conditions, and work close to their homes, which is a good thing. So yes, we should be looking back, but we should also ask ourselves the question: why is it, for all the fuss, all the discussion, and so on, we can only point to 2 garden cities that have been developed as Howard proposed, plus some suburbs like Hampstead Garden Suburb, where I used to live.
So, I mean, if we look at London specifically, I mean, do you expect our town centres to benefit from the impact of COVID-19? Particularly, we're going to be seeing more home working, so less commuting into the centre. What will that do to local areas in outer London?
Well, I think there are 2 or 3 aspects to your question. Firstly, I think undoubtedly the epidemic will have a huge impact because it will produce a huge amount of vacant space in the center of our towns. And they will reinforce the American donut model where you get a hole in the center and all the activities on the edge. So I think that was happening already before the virus. The danger is that when towns and streets do reopen, there won't be the critical mass needed because the small firms will just not think it's worth the effort or the risk to take on leases, just give up, and the multiples already have withdrawn. So there'll be nothing left to attract people in. And I could see a situation where the homeless will be as plentiful as ever, and you will, rather like in San Francisco, where there are 10,000 people sleeping out in the streets, you will be very conscious of homeless people in a way that you're not at the present time. People think we have a problem, but it's nothing compared with the States. So that's a gloomy prospect. Yes, I think people will work from home much more. I think they've discovered that they don't need it to be in the office except possibly company. And the meetings are probably best held in a restaurant or pub. So I think that this has a huge bearing on alas, London particularly has been investing largely in office blocks on a huge scale, continually rebuilding the City of London and extending into Docklands and so on. And yeah, we've also done a bit of investment in transport. But the investment has not really been going into creating communities. And I think the tower block is fatally flawed. You may have seen this rather good piece of research by someone at Arabs, which shows that they do cost at least twice as much. And they have all sorts of disadvantages. So I think we may see empty tower blocks or just used to stuff poor people in, which is not doing them a service, just as we did in the past. And the wealthier people, people like yourself, will indeed spend more time in their home or walking around Bedford Park or whatever, or for exercise. And that will be a good thing. But the net implication is a widening of inequalities. I think you really need to distinguish between different races. I think black and minor sort of ethnic population are the people who work on the front line, can't work from home. I think they'll be going off to work, no doubt working ever longer hours and suffering. I'm not sure how many people of the kind one's thinking of in working from home live on the edge of suburban town centres. I'm speaking to you from Stroud, which I think has got good prospects for recovery for 101 reasons, not least the fact that many people living around the town centres. The town centres are run by the competent town council. They've already closed the road, that main road down to, and put the farmers market into that as well. So the farmers market has expanded. And you've got masses of people who really care about their town. Most people, I think, in the London suburbs really feel that where they're living now is no longer ideal. It's no longer the way Ruislip was in 1910, for example, and are really wanting to get out of London altogether. So that's not a good thing, because I think that there are a significant number of people who will feel very miserable, not just in being depressed and too ill to work, but also in planning to burn things down or beat each other up or whatever. So I see a level of much greater friction than we've experienced to date. You can see it perhaps with the Black Lives Matter sort of movement. And so any kindness that might have been developed, particularly out in places like Stroud, could be overturned by the roughness of people who are feeling left behind. I don't see the government doing anything to really appreciate these challenges. I don't see them mobilizing the empty space that is needed. This belief that the market will solve problems is misguided. And so, as I say, the divisions which are already great will lead to a complete fracturing of society. And the British economy, which is pretty weak to start off with, and a fraction of the performance of Germany or Denmark, if you like, it will go downhill further, as it has done with coronavirus. It's no coincidence that Germany has a 1/9 of our death rate, because they're organized. They don't behave as we do. They don't have this fantasy about the market.
But your vision of the suburbs breaking up with groups fighting each other and so on seems a very long way from the research you did about London's town suggesting more investment needed, but they hadn't had enough investment.
They hadn't, yes, yes, yes. I used to go back to Welling in particular, Bexley Heath, as a sort of bellwether to check how things were doing. And I was always surprised. National Front started in Welling, so I thought it was a good place to. I'm not even sure if we do that sort of work. The town centre statistics that we developed with CASA, I'm not sure if they're even published. They're certainly not used. There's nobody left to do any analysis. There are far more analytic tools available. You can check footfall through mobile phones, but I don't see people doing that. I don't see I think town centre management, which was funded by the large retailers like Boots and M&S, must be floundering. We never did what the Americans did, which was to charge the landowners, the property owners, rather than the retailers. So again and again, we say all the right things, but we don't act on them. It's as though we just believe in the catechism, just reciting the same old words. Well, I speak as an economist. I went to Stanford Business School, as I noticed the Chancellor of the Exchequer went. And I learned a lot from going there, and also going back to America, to California recently. I did a postcard from the West Coast in my blog. And it was really intriguing to see that even in places with the smartest firms, Apple, Facebook, Google, and so on, they have totally failed to crack the real problems of unaffordable housing or congestion. People are having to drive 2 hours to work. They're living in camper vans. Blacks no longer live in, you may have seen the film, Last Black Man in San Francisco. They've been displaced out to 2 hours away. I see these trends being what the market does. And new immigrants, if you like, the Asians and Latin Americans have displaced the African American. Now, that isn't a formula for everyone living happily together. It's certainly not the sort of thing that's needed to cope with the big challenges of population movement, a growing proportion of people who are not working, elderly dependents, and so on and so forth. So I think we know exactly what's wrong. We've known what's wrong for 20 or 30 years, but I don't see ourselves acting, and I don't see local authorities, alas, probably having the resources or will on the whole to act together. Now, the government, I understand, is looking to the future of combined authorities, but the problem is that the friction between left and right is so great. It's very hard to see Hillingdon, Ealing, and Hounslow working together, as I believe they do. I wrote this report with Jonathan Manns on reshaping London, and we pointed to the potential of Northolt as a garden suburb or city, 3 underground stations already. It's an easy thing to do in relative terms, and yet we see no action. So that we continue with a few iconic projects with, in my view, unnecessarily extending high-speed 2 from Old Oak to Euston for a huge cost, a high proportional cost, and almost zero benefit, because we won't rethink things. It's very odd, because I remember saying to the National Infrastructure Commission, we just need to spend a bit of time thinking. People are terribly busy. But if you could just get people occasionally from different backgrounds together in the same room or on a webinar and organizing it, maybe we might make some progress. But apart from possibly the progress in sharing knowledge, which has happened under the COVID webinars, I don't see much sign that we're behaving differently.
Well, Nick, thank you very much for your time and for your insights.